3 quick disclaimers before we get started. Number 1, this is not going to be your standard review of Star Wars. I'm not going to talk about what did and what didn't work, because that's already been done to death. Instead, I'm going to talk about this film's place in the larger Star Wars universe with the benefit of hindsight and what we know about filmmaking today. Number 2, Red Letter Media has done the defining review of Star Wars The Phantom Menace, which is why I'm not going to review it bit by bit by bit. I highly recommend you check out Red Letter Media's review because it is perfect. Everything about it is great. I love it so much. And if you really want to know why this film didn't work within the context of the film and the prequel trilogy, I highly recommend you check that out because that is, as far as I'm concerned, the Phantom Menace review. And point number 3, this is going to be the first in a 6 or 7 episode review of when we go through Star Wars bit by bit leading up to Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. So with that, let's kick off the Star Wars season. Star Wars Episode 1 is an interesting film. It's one of the most important films ever made, actually. That's not to say it's great, mind you. It's not even really good. But is all the hate for the film unwarranted? Maybe so. While the film is not as beloved as those in the original trilogy, it is fascinating to look back on. Die-hard fans of the original trilogy may wish this film was never made, but through the lens of retrospect and franchise filmmaking, The Phantom Menace provides us with an intriguing series of topics to discuss. Like I said, die-hard fans may say they wish the prequels were never made. Here, now, in 2015, that might be the case. But was it the case in 1997? At the time, we only had 3 films released over the course of the preceding decade. We were hungry to revisit the galaxy far, far away, and the series had a good track record to boot. In 1997, what reason did we have to doubt the quality of the film? Similarly, the special effects involved, that is to say the heavily CG'd characters and environments, were also not red flags. Lucas and ILM had a history of pushing the envelope on visual effects, and at that point we were all still dazzled by what computers were able to do. It was only natural to assume that continuing down the path of technology would be the best move for the series. With the appetite for Star Wars alive and well, the technology available for limitless effects, and a creative vision uninhibited by time and money, this film on paper should have been fantastic. So where did it all go wrong? Why isn't the film loved? What happened? What it all comes down to is a simple misunderstanding of the film. George Lucas and the team involved simply didn't understand what it was about Star Wars and the mythology that made us love the series so much. There was an air of confidence about the process, bordering on arrogance, that led to the project going unchecked. Making fun of Jar Binks is easy. Even the most ardent prequel apologist would have a hard time defending the character. Yes, he's annoying, pandering, and worthless to the overall story, but he represents something larger. He is the physical manifestation of a filmmaker's inability to understand what makes a likable character. His humor isn't what's bothersome, it's who he is. Star Wars has always had jokes, and characters have always been funny.
Everything's under control, situation normal.
What happened?
Had a slight weapons malfunction, but everything's perfectly alright now. We're fine, we're all fine here now, thank you. How are you?
The humor was there, but it came as a result of likable characters and their interactions with one another. Dialing up the humor was overcompensating for having a character that wasn't compelling or relatable in any other dimension. The slapstick humor wouldn't have been as cringe-inducing if it came as a result of the interaction with other characters in the film, assuming we liked them as well.
Han, can you reach my lightsaber? Yeah, sure.
That lack of character depth wasn't limited to Jar Binks as well. The filmmakers operated under the assumption that bigger and faster was better. Unfortunately, this too was not the case. The final lightsaber battle, a fight between Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Darth Maul, was an impressive feat in swordplay choreography, but it lacked the raw emotion that defined the earlier battles. Darth Maul had a solid 4 lines up to that point in the film, so there weren't any emotions tied up in the battle. Both of these issues, and many more, can be chalked up to the difficulty of revisiting a film after so many years. The technology is different, the audience has changed, and expectations are much higher. If it was just an annoying character and a few stoic performances, we may have given the film a pass. However, there's one lingering point that succinctly sums up the filmmaker's misunderstanding of Star Wars' role in cinema.
Midichlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells.
They live inside me.
Inside your cells, yes. And we are symbionts with them.
Symbionts?
Life forms living together for mutual advantage. Without the Midichlorians, life could not exist, and we would have no knowledge of the Force.
This may not seem like a big point. I was, in fact, an ardent defender of midichlorians for years. After all, with laser guns, faster than light travel, artificial intelligence, and countless other technological marvels, it only makes sense that people within the universe would understand the science of the Force. Really, it does. It's a perfectly logical thing for a science fiction film to introduce. The problem is, Star Wars at its core isn't science fiction, it's fantasy. What do I mean by that? Science fiction takes many shapes and sizes, but when you boil it down to a few basic traits, most science fiction films have these things in common. They take our fears or aspirations for the future and visualize them on screen. They feature exploration of the unknown and find ways to translate current issues into otherworldly stories. They explore the consequences of our actions here and now and ask questions about the paths on which we're traveling. For example, in the 1950s, nuclear war was a common fear, so naturally many films capitalized on this. It gave us some great films and led us to question many of the decisions that were being made in our day-to-day lives. As society moved beyond the threat of nuclear war, science fiction took on different topics, questioning social and psychological norms, often addressing issues of cultural and racial tolerance. Fantasy, on the other hand, quite often deals with notions of magic, mythology, and archetypes. The fantasy genre is commonly an outlet for authors who want to build worlds and cultures from their own imagination. While characters can be complex and ambiguous, there are many that fit within the schemas that have existed in our minds for generations. The themes and stories are often timeless. I'm not saying that every film in these categories must operate under all these rules, and certainly there's a bit of overlap between the two. But many films in these genres take advantage of at least some of these tropes. Genre is less about the tools used in the films, aka the hardware, and more about the conventions of the story. That's why Star Wars is more of a fantasy film than a science fiction film. Luke is on a personal journey, learning the magic of the Force and meeting several archetypal characters along the way. In the original trilogy, we never get a veiled metaphor for minority rights or the Vietnam War. The main story beats are timeless topics that appeal to the emotional side of our brains. Love, duty, betrayal, etc. The Phantom Menace, and its two sequels, operate more as science fiction films than fantasy. Palpatine's rise to power directly mirrors Adolf Hitler's. The ethics of war is frequently discussed, political ideologies are at play, and taxes are mentioned ad nauseum. Midichlorians are the most basic manifestation of the tension between magic and science. By opting to scientifically quantify the Force, the series made a jump from fantasy to science fiction. And science fiction isn't bad, mind you, but it's not what audiences had come to expect from Star Wars. It was a jarring contradiction to what we had previously come to love about the original films. Mix in the unrelatable characters and the wooden delivery of exposition and action, and it's not hard to see why the film didn't work. I'm not saying that if you take out midichlorians the movie works, because that would just be crazy talk. But since the problems with the film are broad and far-reaching, like the Force, it helps to break down the topic to its very core unit of measurement, which is what a midichlorian is. I hate that I just used that analogy. There are other issues with the film too. Villains that come and go without any development, convoluted plot lines, confusing character motivations, and over-reliance on computer graphics, poor direction, wooden acting, etc. But at the end of the day, we have since come to learn that it was an issue of understanding expectations. The filmmakers simply gambled on all the wrong things. We didn't want to see bigger battles, newer aliens, faster fights, harder science. We wanted to love our characters. We wanted a blossoming friendship between Obi-Wan and Anakin, a magical adventure, and to feel like kids again as we ventured into another world. Everything else is just an added bonus. While we didn't get that from this film, or to be honest, its two successors, we did learn a lot about franchise filmmaking. Remember, in 1999, the giant mega legacy blockbuster wasn't as commonplace as it is now. There were no MCUs, no Harry Potters, no interconnected universes. Sure, you had James Bond, but that series was so varied it was viewed differently in its own right. Star Wars was the first franchise that was beloved in this way. So in a sense, Episode 1 was an experiment that unfortunately went awry. Now, like any other failure, as admirable as it may be, it offers us an opportunity to learn. The film taught us about tone, characters, storytelling. We learned not to take for granted the classics with which we grew up, and we could only hope Hollywood learned to listen to fans when it came to franchises. We know what we love, and why we love it.
Are you an angel?
Shut up! But those are just our thoughts on the film. Do you have thoughts of your own? Let us know in the comments down below, and be sure to check out Red Letter Media for the full Phantom Menace review if you want to get a full experience of why that film didn't work. And as always, for more games, comics, movies, and more, keep it right here on Nerdy Inc.